Um, there you go. We are recording. So yeah, welcome to this camera speaker series talk. We've got a super interesting group of speakers lined up today on the topic of rehearsing in virtual reality. And this comes via a partnership between Camera and Bristol Old Vic Theatre School. For anyone who isn't aware, Camera, we're a computer science-based research centre at the University of Bath, and we often work in partnership with industry. So today's talk puts one of those brilliant examples under the spotlight. My name's Jamie Eastman. I'm the Creative Industries Partnership Manager at Camera. And shortly you'll be hearing from Jenny Stevens, who's the director of the theatre school, and thereafter Tobias Millard and Ellie Stevens, who are directors who've been taught via the school's programme. We will be saving a bit of time for some questions from yourselves later on. So maybe have a think about you know, some things as we talk. Hopefully we'll trigger some thoughts, and you'll have some things that you might want to ask either Ellie or Tobias or Jenny. I will also sort of introduce really the project that's the background to Tobias and Ellie's experiences that they'll be telling us about. But before I do that, I'm going to ask Jenny Stevens from Bristol Old Vic Theatre School to tell us a bit about why the school is collaborating with Camera. Hopefully it will be good things, good you know, reasons. And yeah, particularly why working with new technology and future computing is of interest to them. So over to you, Jenny.
Thanks very much. So I'm Jenny Stevens. I'm the artistic director at the theatre school, and just to give you a little bit of context about the school before I hand over to the MA directing students who've been working on this project. The Bristol Vic Theatre School is a conservatoire drama school. I suppose the most famous, but where best, the most famous conservatoire drama school in the UK might be RADA. So think of that. So a conservatoire drama school training is about training through practice. It's degree level. In fact, our directing students here are on master's degree. They're doing MAs. We're a higher education institution. We're small but perfectly formed. We have a tiny cohort. We have 200 students, and that's across all courses and all years of all courses. We have about half our students are actors. And in terms of our graduates, just to give you an idea of sort of who we are, the chances of getting in onto the acting programme are roughly sort of 100 to 1. In terms of the graduates we put out, they're people like, you know, over the years, it's Patrick Stewart, it's Naomi Harris, it's Olivia Colman. Indeed, if you watch The Crown, in that last, I think it was season 5 or whatever, we had Josh O'Connor is ours playing Prince Charles, Erin Doherty playing Princess Anne, Tom playing Prince Andrew. We don't talk so much about him, and of course Queen Olivia. And so you know, we are putting students out at a really top level in terms of directing alumni. Greg Doran, who's just standing down from the RSC, is one of our alumni. Erica Newman who is the deputy director there, is also one of our alumni. So you know, so we're great. And that, sorry, that does sound like we're showing off a bit, but it's just that we do work at quite a high professional level is what we're doing. We're trying to put out students really going into the top of the industry and as industry leaders in their field. It's a very bespoke sort of education, and as I say, absolutely practice-based all the way through. In terms of our relationship with Camera, I first started working with them, it must be 6 or 7 years ago, when we first started to collaborate, and that was coming over and using the VR, putting our students actually, to start with, it wasn't the VR. To start with, it was motion capture. So we were coming across and putting our students into the motion capture suits, where they have the little dots and they're put into the studio, of which I'm sure everybody else can talk about this much more scientifically than I can, but the movement is captured, and camera obviously very much focused on the medical uses of that sort of capture, the sporting uses of that sort of capture, but also the creative and artistic and entertainment dimension to that sort of engagement with technology. And obviously that is our territory. So the first project we did was about putting our students in the suits, getting them moving, and was about biped to quadruped. How could our actors move in such a way that that could then be captured, that movement be captured, and then it could be translated, if you like, into quadruped creatures. You know, how do we have to move? How do we inhabit character in order to make that transition happen? Because obviously our proportions are all different. So you line up our actors' bodies and the ways in which they move with a technology that then can translate that and then can extend limbs in different ways and so on. So we got quite excited in just what these sorts of technologies can do. And then the next sort of project that we moved into, and we've had lots of brainstorms on the way about how can we use digital character within a stage show? What are the challenges of that? What are the opportunities of that? Lockdown hit us a couple of years ago, and we decided at that point to start experimenting with the VR headsets. Could we do something? You know, there were students who would be in different rooms to rehearse because we were trying to keep people apart. And obviously it is absolutely an art form that is about encounter between characters. So how can we facilitate this when people are just a long way away from each other? What are the sort of things that we can do to attempt to get an authentic and immersive experience? I think that, and we can talk about how near the technology is to that and how far away it is. What are the things that we can do? So I was talking with Darren Koska, the then director of camera. What are those things we can do where people can be on different continents? Can you rehearse in rooms across the continent, on different continents? And also, what does that do in terms of saving the planet, in terms of our footprint, about not having to fly people around to rehearse and potentially perform, but we were interested in rehearsing at the time. And so we developed a project, and we brought in the sort of psychology department at Bath University to construct questionnaires in order to be able to interrogate the experiences that actors might have if we were putting them in headsets, having them in different spaces, having their little mini-me's as their characters, because they themselves wouldn't sort of be entering the space, but their little avatars would be encountering with each other. What were sorts of questions we were wanting to investigate? What were the sort of permissions we needed to do that, to keep people safe? And I then sort of like was handing this over to students, because to get them to do that experimenting and to get our directors playing in the room and experimenting, with actors, but looking at how does it work if you might fight together, so that you're in your room and you're watching, another avatar is coming to you, but how immersive is that? What can you create? What happens with text? What's the sort of emotional dynamic of it? Because so often when we're in rooms together, that sense of communion when you're acting, you are sort of like breathing together. I'm imagining the things that will come out of this are that the sort of like but I love it when I'm wrong about things. I was imagining that the broader things that one could do, the sort of like staging of something you might be able to work on, the fun of it you might be able to work on, but actually the finer motor skills, that finer sense of communion as you act together, maybe more of a challenge. And so I'm really interested to hear about where the actors sort of have taken this, because they've just picked it up and run with it as far as I'm concerned. But that is the sort of like, that's the background to the project, and that's a little bit the background to the theatre school. And I'll stop there.
Amazing, thank you, Jenny. That's fabulous. I think we've got a real impression there of you know how we've got to this point, and also I think really amazing to hear the, you know, I suppose the point at which all of these thoughts and these projects and these things were sort of came to sort of handing over to directly to the students to try out, and so I think if I guess Tobias and Ellie, it's probably a good time for you to just say hello, and then I'll maybe share a few slides. But it seems terribly rude not to kind of make you know, get you to wave really to everybody so they know who you are, and because you know we'll be hearing from you shortly. And you've been absolutely brilliant sports in terms of yeah, kind of taking a lead on this project. I'll just share a few slides, mainly actually to show everybody the VR applications that that Tobias and Ellie kind of worked with, but also just to share the sort of I suppose the technical aspects of how, you know, what we were doing, which was very much I guess a study that my colleague Anna, who's also on this call, has sort of helped to design it from a psychological point of view. So I think that's sort of useful to share. So let's see if I can you know, manage that with the screen sharing. Hang on, skip too far ahead. There we go. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a gateway slide, but I think just sort of worth I'm just looking at this picture here, that, you know, here we have the sort of live context that Jenny was talking about, and then the other picture is, you know, what might be a kind of, I suppose, yeah, a computer generated version of that. But I think it's important to try to imagine and envisage for this conversation that actually what Tobias and Ellie have been doing is they've been in that picture. They have been kind of working as avatars with fellow actors, you know, inside that sort of computer image there. And this is just a slide to, I think, remind us that both Ellie and Tobias are sort of drama directing masters. Have you guys graduated now? I think you might have done, or you're nearabouts, is that right?
We finish on Friday.
There you go. So it's really great to catch you before you head off to do really incredible things, as Jenny described, as such an amazing alumni. So I'm pretty excited to see what you guys get up to next. Hang on, I'll try and skip this forward. Right, there we go. So this is the slide that I mainly wanted to share, which was, these were the two applications that that Tobias and Ellie were working with. I am going to learn exactly whether you've focused on one or the other shortly, I imagine, but there's a range of kind of off-the-shelf VR applications that one can, you know, expressly for the purposes of sort of socializing in a remote way, that you can, you know, you put on your headset and you can enter into these embodied environments as a, you know, from a first person perspective. So yeah, these are just little quick slides to sort of share what you know, how it maybe looks, I suppose, when you put your headset on, and what you might encounter. It's a very kind of, it's very much a sort of pre-populated universe, one that in some instances people have the freedom to design their own worlds and design their own characters in which you can interact with it and be. So you know, it's an interesting situation for a number of different reasons. One of the reasons being that it's not bespoke for theatre making or rehearsing specifically. These are just very much off the shelf applications, and this is a sort of technical look at this project from the perspective of psychological study and what we actually did together. So we spent a little bit of time introducing Tobias and Ellie to the VR platforms and the applications, but also sort of headsets. And we had some fun, getting all our accounts lined up. I think I was by far and away the worst at doing all of that, but these things did take longer actually than you would think. But the reason we did that was so that then Toby and Ellie could then take on and work with some actors directly and onboard them for a couple of rehearsals that they then took forward. And underneath there, you see some slides, or some images, sorry, that just suggest the way that we then looked to extract a bit of information from all the participants from a sort of psychological perspective, to sort of really learn about what the experiences were of all the participants through the project. But basically, the way it ran was that each of the directors worked with two pairs of actors, and so effectively, I have to do my maths now, but effectively there were 10 people in total, 8 actors. Have I got that right? Does that sound right? Is that about right? Yeah, 8 actors. So Toby worked with 4, Ellie worked with 4, but in a pair each time. So I'll stop sharing, and I've got, I guess, a couple of questions to ask you guys, but I guess I just thought I would just to start with, just sort of ask you whether you've enjoyed the project, and also whether you'd worked with VR before or done anything like this before. I actually know Toby, you were probably one of the students that maybe put on the suits that Jenny was talking about before, but other than that, I wondered what your experiences with creative technology or technology like this has been previously.
I'll jump. Hello everyone. Thanks for having us in today. I hadn't come across this kind of technology before this project. We had a bit of Ellie and I both went to Camera and met with Jamie and some of the team there before the project, and we got to have a play with some of that motion capture technology and had a look at the simulated pigs and things like that. But that was my first introduction, so I was a bit mind blown by the whole thing. But it's been fascinating.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same as Toby. I think that the closest thing that I got to was when you can get like kind of goggles and stick your phone in the front and get a YouTube video that looks like you're on a roller coaster and have a little look around, and that's as far as I got to before. So yeah, this I think mind blowing really is kind of the word. It's such an exciting thing to be part of. Yeah.
And what about the actors, Ellie? Had they done stuff like this before?
No, none of the actors I'd worked with had ever used it before, so we were all on kind of the same learning journey together, which was really nice.
So everybody was kind of fresh to this. I think the funniest thing about it was I was absolutely just as fresh when I was having a look at it too, and it was all very very new. But since then I've become a little bit more confident. I've hung out with a few people in VR chat and so on. But I think nonetheless, I think what's really amazing about this, and also what I think Jenny is really I think working to perhaps for the school to be sort of a bit, pioneering in this way, is that I think you probably are one of the first within the theatre making community to, excuse my pictures sort of gone completely dark, hopefully they will come back. Anyway, you're first in the theatre making community to have conducted rehearsals in VR, and I just thought we'd just maybe hear about how you conducted those rehearsals, and whether you ended up choosing a specific platform, and just walk us through really what happened, and I'll let you guys you can chip in with each other as you speak, however you want to answer those questions, but yeah, Ellie, how did it begin for you?
So it began with us all being in our separate kind of bedrooms and on Zoom together, kind of learning how to turn it on and log in and all that kind of stuff. And so by the end of the first session, we had all got together in one environment. I'd chosen like a theatre location that had a nice little bar and had an outside arena. And it was really nice to kind of almost give people the tour of my house. I could show people around. My two actors in both sessions, by the end of the first session, came to that, and that was in AltSpace VR. So that's the main platform that we used. And then for the rest of the sessions, we ended up finding an improvisation generator. And because we realized that there was so much that we wanted to do, we didn't want to focus on one particular text. We wanted to open ourselves up. And actually, one of the main benefits of being in VR is the fact that people tend to make all the choices and be bigger. And so it was really interesting, some of the things we came up with. So the generator would give us things like, can you keep a secret? Or there'll be grave consequences if you choose incorrectly, or hi, I'll be your substitute teacher for the day. You know, just kind of starting sentences for the actors to then go on and play with. And I think that it worked really well. So we had some sessions in our own houses, and then we had some sessions in the same room in school together. And that did actually affect what we could do quite a lot, I found. So we managed to, because there's a little bit of a lag on the microphone, being able to hear each other was really clear, which was very handy. And you kind of get that instant response and can talk over a little bit more. Whereas I think when you're doing that in VR over a microphone, it's not quite the same. But I'll pass on to Toby to speak for a little bit as well.
Yeah, similar sort of experience. So we before starting the sessions, I had a bit of a play with the VR headsets and had a look at both those programs that you were showing, and VR chat for me was a little too video game like. You can only really have non-human avatars in there, and I did run a couple of sessions that weren't part of this research project, but they were part of the sort of preparation with some actors, and we tried VR chat, and I think we struggled to maintain focus maybe in those rehearsals. So switched into AltSpace for these ones where you can have humanistic avatars and you can kind of customize them to be a little more like yourself. And I think that really does make a difference. That's something that I found. But yeah, similar experience to Ellie. In terms of rehearsing remotely, it's very different to when you're practicing with the VR headsets all in one room. In terms of communication, we did two different things. So we did a scene from an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, which Jenny actually directed recently, and we played with that in VR. And what we did was we rehearsed it over the two sessions in the VR world, and then at the end of the last session we actually did the scene in real life, if you can call it that, but without any kind of planning. So we kind of went straight from in the headsets to playing the scene, and we tried to see how closely what everyone understood that thing to be from the VR world resembled what happened in real life. Which was an interesting experiment. And we did a similar thing with the other two actors, where I'd been doing improv work with them. And similarly, we created a scene, sort of very short little moment, and did a similar thing where we set up the same world we'd had in VR in real life with bits of furniture, but no kind of rehearsal in real life. And did the scene, and again, it's interesting to see how much was retained and how much was different, and to sort of question why that was.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we did something similar. So we did the scene, and then we took the headsets off and ran the scene again without any talk in between. We just went straight from one to another. And something that was really interesting was the kind of intimacy that the actors had towards each other in VR. I think because because it wasn't actually you, it was your avatar that was closer, people were a lot more comfortable going right up close to you, touching you, all that kind of stuff. And then there were a couple of moments in real life when the actors kind of stopped themselves and went, oh, is it okay if I touch your arm? Or can I touch your face here? Or can I be this close to you? And those conversations it felt like they hadn't needed to happen in virtual reality, which was really interesting.
Yeah, and that's a really, really interesting insight. I think that sense of people, yeah, how close they want to get in terms of their personal space. And I was curious actually as to why you think, or I don't know if you had the same experience, Ellie, but why, the sort of humanistic avatars perhaps worked best. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what we found was I was actually working with actors that I'd never worked with before, and they hadn't worked with each other before. And being able to see an avatar that was very close to them kind of created a shared experience and a kind of bonding already between them. So normally when I start rehearsals, you spend lots of time trying to create a company and trying to create a kind of sense of bonding between everybody. But because there was the shared experience of going into virtual reality and you kind of see somebody who looks like that person, that kind of happened instantly. And so there wasn't lots of worrying, there wasn't hesitation, there wasn't any being, what's it called? Like being self-conscious, I think is the word, because you were instantly in this world and there were so many things to think about. You kind of focused a little bit more because there was somebody there, which is really interesting. When we first met each other in the VR world, we all kind of shook hands and felt it was a little bit strange because it felt like there was somebody new there, but you did get to know them better quicker, I think.
Yeah, I just suddenly thought that it's probably worth saying. Had you met before? Did I think you maybe mentioned this, but did you with the actors that you worked with, were there instances where this was, you hadn't never even been in the same room before or anything like that?
So I'd been in like group sessions with them before, and I'd met them outside school and at the pub and that kind of thing, but I hadn't worked with them one-to-one before. So that was really nice to get to know them. And I also think that probably created a different sense of work as well. I think if it had been with people who I had worked with before and then going into VR, there would be lots of kind of re-establishing boundaries and re-establishing what the rules were and what my role was as a director and that kind of thing. Whereas coming into it with actors I hadn't worked with before, we were starting fresh, which was really nice.
And again, same questions for you really, Toby, but I guess I suddenly sort of thinking there that something I forgive me for it's maybe a naive question, but you still often you want to warm up before rehearsal, right? You want to kind of, I don't know, get into the mood a bit, and how do you do that in VR?
Yeah, so we tried a few different things for that, and it is an interesting question. I think in reality, if I was running a process with VR, I'd probably try and encourage people to do a bit of a warm up in their own time before joining the session. But in terms of what we tried things like ball games, so you can get basketballs in alt space and you can actually throw and catch them. What the technology seems to struggle a little more with is if you want to throw and catch them between different users. And we spent quite a long time trying to work out whether it was just us or whether it was the technology, and we couldn't be entirely sure. But to save our blushes, I'll say it was the technology. So we tried ball games. You can get these huge kind of mirrors, which is actually really helpful. It's something that we do in rehearsal rooms a lot. Is you get these big mirrors, which is, I think it's really useful for performers to see themselves, especially if you're doing something quite physical, to see how your body's moving and to be able to kind of adapt it in real time. And in VR, it's really easy because nothing is real. You can turn a wall into a full sort of floor to ceiling mirror, and that means that then as a group you can stand in front of that and you can do various sort of movement exercises and learn how to sort of, in the VR world, how to sort of sync movement together and how to get a bit of an ensemble feel to the work. So those sorts of exercises I found were quite good for focusing us into the space, but it would have been nice to throw and catch a ball.
Any comments there, Ellie? What did you guys do for your warm-ups?
To warm up, actually, we went around the space because I used a couple of different spaces each session. So they were theatres, but they were different theatres. So we'd kind of go around and map out where we were, where we could see each other. we tried to do a couple of stretches and that kind of thing, which is quite funny because obviously you can only see your hands, and so there were some weird shapes that were coming out, which, yeah, I mean, again, it's part of all of that bonding that I was talking about before. That I think for this, the warm-up actually comes from being comfortable in the space rather than for the body of the actor necessarily being particularly warm, because it is mainly coming from your mind and your hands. The thing about your voices as well, because it's on the microphone, you don't necessarily need to project as much. You can just hear it instantly. You can talk to people straight away. So I think all of that, yeah, the warm-up was mainly for the space and getting into the right headset, as Toby said, mind space, as Toby was saying, yeah.
And for anyone that hasn't used these platforms before, so or even the headsets before, so you know, you've kind of outlined it a little bit, but you how embodied are you? You know, what are you controlling, and yeah, what does you know, how mobile can you be, and how real does it feel?
So I think it kind of depends. You can have if you have a big empty space, when you first log into the headset, you have like a defined playing space, as Carolyn I think just asked, where you kind of like draw out where you can go, and then if you get close to that boundary, it'll tell you to kind of not go any closer, and it'll tell you to turn around a bit. That's slightly different if you have 3 actors all in the one space with the headsets on, because it doesn't register how close you are to other people. So you did have a bit of bumping into each other. But you can also move just with the joystick on your hands. So it registers your face, like your eyes and where you're looking, and then your hands as well. You can move, you can thumbs up, you can point, because there are sensors on the handsets as well.
Yeah, and just to kind of echo that and speak to Caroline's question in the chat there, a lot of the time we would find ourselves in sort of, you can really choose what setup you want to be in, and I think something that the technology might be able to offer in future is being able to design your own space to rehearse, and I think that would be really beneficial. But for now, we used sort of domestic settings a lot. So for the Pride and Prejudice, we had a scene that takes place in a sort of a drawing room, so we were able to find a sort of virtual equivalent to that with furniture and furnishings. And then in the real world, we sort of set that up as best we could with what we had, so chairs and blocks and things to emulate that geography. It was interesting looking at the spacing, because in VR, I think I found that the actors had a tendency to forget what we might term stagecraft. So when you're rehearsing in reality, you have a good awareness of where your audience is, and you sort of do various things to make sure you're always sharing outwards with all of those people, and you sort of, it's in the small things of how you space yourself on stage, and that's part of a director's job as well, is to sort of observe those moments. In VR, I noticed that there was less of an awareness of that. It felt like the audience could exist in 360 almost, and so they would often kind of, those rules tended to be they slid a little bit, and that was interesting, and I didn't necessarily challenge that to begin with. It was just when we got to the point of wanting to then do it in reality, it was interesting seeing how they then had to adapt to go, oh wait, but there's someone there, there's an audience there, and now I'm stood in them. So yeah, an interesting one. Yeah, how the space kind of changed.
Yeah, I think that because I didn't go into kind of more domestic settings and have sets. I just had an empty stage, and so they were really clear about where the audience was. But what was really interesting was they then said that they found it harder to imagine anything on that empty stage. So if we were rehearsing in real life and there was an empty stage, people could imagine a schoolroom, for example, and say, okay, yeah, the blackboard's here, this is what we're doing. But I think because they're already having to imagine, some of them found it hard to reimagine on top of that. What was really interesting was there was sometimes when I wouldn't say anything when we go from VR to real life. So they take the headsets off and they hadn't established where the audience was. And so one of them would be facing that way and the other one would be facing that way. But they wouldn't they wouldn't kind of click that actually, oh, you think the audience is there and I think the audience is here, because they just kind of thought that there was already that shared understanding established. Yeah, which was really interesting actually.
What kind of works really well and what didn't work so well, you know, in either the ways around that you were trying it? What were the things that you were like, oh, that was great, that was actually better than I thought?
I think I mentioned it before, but actors were a lot more bold in their choices, and in their physicality as well. They would, because I think you can only express with your hands and with your head. You know, there are no facial expressions, that kind of thing. People really were a lot bigger because we really appreciated those gestures when you could see them and you could kind of react to them. Um, Again, I think there was like the instant icebreaker, you know, the shared experience between actors, everyone being on the same page. Um, and it was really fun. People had like a lot of, yeah, people were a lot more fun. There was none of the pressure that they put on themselves. I think when you're acting, you tend to sometimes find it hard to get out of your own head, and so you're worrying about what you'll look like or what your next line will be, especially in improv, or where you want the story to go. Whereas all of those inhibitions were kind of lost when you're in VR, because it feels like a bit of a safer space. You kind of have this mask on, and so you feel freer to try stuff out.
Yeah, I definitely echo the idea of it being a bit like mask work. If you do mask work in theatre, it's all about accentuating physical gesture to communicate ideas. It's how the ancient Greeks did a lot of chorus work, and I definitely found that as well with the VR of these avatars. For me, there was never an understanding that the avatar was the person I was with. It was very much an object being manipulated by someone else, and therefore the way that you sort of communicate through that becomes accentuated and exaggerated. And putting that back into real life, sometimes that was quite helpful, because it meant that actually something that quite a common rehearsal exercise is to really sort of activate certain words, like doing words, like verbs in a sentence to bring a speech alive. So that was helpful. But in other instances, they were certainly doing a lot more in VR to get across not very much that they wouldn't do in real life, because you have that connection. You have so many more tools at your disposal physically. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the subtlety and the nuance within the acting is lost. I think especially in facial expressions, there's a moment when one of the actors in one of her lines was like, I'll smile at him like this. And the face didn't change, which was really was really funny. Then we had to use our imaginations a bit. I think as well, lots of acting is about, and lots of rehearsals is about getting movement into the body and being able to kind of let go and feel it. Whereas actually you are quite confined to holding the joysticks. You can't touch your face because there's a headset in the way. You can't see where your legs are. You can't necessarily move in a way that you want to, because the game isn't expecting you to pretend to be a snake or whatever it is that you're kind of doing in that moment. And then as a director, I think I found it quite hard not to be able to make eye contact with people, because your eyes don't move. I think a part of directing is being able to check in quite subtly across the room, and like kind of have like private conversations, or make sure people are okay, make sure everyone's listening. But actually it's really hard to kind of have that contact as a director in the space, because the microphone's on and everyone can hear you, so you're either saying something or you're not, which was interesting. So there wasn't really much privacy. I think as well, I felt like I was even more removed from the process. I very much felt like an observer rather than a director a lot of the time. I think well, maybe a facilitator rather than an observer. I think it was a lot harder to kind of quickly interrupt and quickly go back, because it takes a lot of time to focus and rewind stuff, where you could, rather than in real life when it's just really quite instantaneous.
How do you think you could kind of address that? Because I think we're all now on the call getting a bit of an insight into how the director's craft usually works, and maybe how there were certain barriers to that happening in VR. Do you have any suggestions for any program developers on the call as to what a bespoke theatre making VR app might include? I mean, I think clearly facial capture would be something like a way to have a more expressive use of kind of the close-up stuff, I guess, would be helpful.
I think
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry, on you go, Toby.
after you.
The idea that you can have scripts in the space would be really helpful, because we couldn't work with text in the space. Actually having literally all being on the same page and being able to say, go back to the top of that page or go back to line 7 or something like that, rather than saying, oh, do you remember that bit that you mentioned that was, and you're in near here? And so you can be really kind of precise if you have text in front of you. Maybe having props like readily available in some more theatrical spaces. So like Toby was saying, balls and boxes and things like that. But one of the main things I was actually thinking of, which isn't something that I use in my real life practice, but I think would be really helpful in VR, would be the ability to record and to remind actors where they were. I think because you're so in the moment in VR, you kind of find it hard to remember exactly what it is you've just done. And so having that recording ability, I think, would be really handy.
Yeah, absolutely echo all of that. I think also just detail of physical embodiment would be really nice, because the more specific you can be with your physical communication, the better, particularly for rehearsing. And I think it was noticeable in some instances where the software wasn't ready to deal with slightly more nuanced movements, so it would do something unexpected, and that can really pull focus. I think the other thing is if there was some way of, Ellie touched on that thing of when you're talking in VR, there's a slight lag, and it can take a while for things to it's not as easy to sort of nip into a scene and give a note and then restart. It takes so much longer. So if there was some way that if you were hosting a session that you could communicate with everybody that you needed to stop the scene. So say you had 6 actors doing a scene, rather than your voice coming in at the same level as theirs, if there was something visual, maybe that, like a little, I don't know, a light that could come on, or like I don't know, some kind of indicator that could instantly tell everyone we're going to pause, have a quick chat, and then carry on, rather than you having to kind of fight your way in. I think that would be helpful. So little tools like that would be great. But yes, also the text thing that Ellie said, I think it feels like something that would be quite easy to do as well. I mean, I say this as someone who knows nothing about it, but it feels like it would be quite easy to do, because you've already got so many things in the VR worlds, like basketballs and cushions and whatever, that you can pick up and hold and move around. Surely we could get like a bit of text uploaded that you could change, or even a whole script, and you could just place it even in mid-air so it was in front of your face. And in fact, that might actually be an advantage VR has over reality, in that you can have words but not be worrying about holding a script. You can still embody.
Yeah, I think there's a feature at the moment where you can use like a web browser and put it up, but currently not everyone can see that, and it's quite inaccessible, especially for finding scripts, because you've got to go through the internet rather than just do like a quick Google search. But there's also, I think there's some kind of like presenting tools as well, where you can have it up like really big on the wall, that I think could definitely be sort of tapped into for script work.
Yeah, I can relate to that, certainly, and I think we also, the big takeaway there is how the director should have, the ability to do the prompting and maybe make some of this, pull the strings on some of these visual cues that are maybe going on there, and that you have a way, as Toby was saying, to be, to, I suppose, communicate in a, as a director, not as some other equal-footed person who's there, because you are trying to kind of get people to do what you want them to do, right? So we've got we're just moving to some questions from anyone, really, but we've got one from Caroline on the chat there, and just referring us back to some of the other things we've talked about. How much did you consider a virtual audience when dealing with the production?
So I think one thing that VR really could be helpful with is sightlines. It's something that we're constantly thinking about as directors when you're making work. Is when you get into the theatre, which is different from your rehearsal space, what are the sightlines going to be like? Are there going to be unexpected pillars or corners where some audience members won't be able to see as much of the stage as you think they will, and therefore those seats will be cheaper, but it's annoying, and sometimes you have to reblock action when you get into a theatre to match the sightlines. So a thought that we talked about in one of our groups was whether you could actually get a 3D mock-up of the space you were going to be performing in, which would mean with actual sort of people sat in the seats, so that as a director you could have the action sort of roughly where it's going to be on that stage. Well, I say roughly, you could probably get quite precise with where it's going to be on that stage, and you could actually as a director go and sit in the auditorium with sort of heads in front of you and see from all the way around in the worst sort of seats, what are the sightlines, how much can people see. I think that would be really beneficial.
I agree. I think to kind of build on Toby's point, I've just done a open air show, and the very first thing that was said by the director was that you're not going to know what it's like until you're in the space, because you can't actually get into the space until later on. And it really made me think about this, because it means that actors really can go into the space. It means your designer can see all the problems that are happening beforehand. It means that all of those little things that are quite time consuming when you go into your tech week and your kind of preview shows that haven't necessarily been considered beforehand, just because you didn't even know they were a possibility, can kind of already be combated from the beginning.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what Jenny was talking about, some of the impetus for the projects stems from, obviously lockdown and how people can come together remotely to rehearse, and but then the how you might be challenged to only use VR for rehearsing and then suddenly present the work, in a real physical space. It would be, that I think you've outlined there some of the things that you'd really want to be looking at. We've got another question from Archie. Do you see VR acting competing with real life theatre directly, or more with something like animation?
I personally think it depends on the accessibility that the audience have. I think for people who don't necessarily experience live theatre because they are, for example, housebound, or the theatre or the venue that they want to go to isn't very accessible, there's something really nice about the ephemerality of theatre, and so being able to see it from your own living room is just such an exciting experience. And so from that point of view, I think that probably it might be able to compete with real life theatre in that way. However, I think for audiences who can already go to the theatre, something like animation is something really interesting, because it's adding that ephemerality on top of it. So I think it kind of competes with both, but in quite different ways.
I would agree. I'm not sure I would say compete with. I don't think for me, it doesn't come close to live theatre, but it is something different and interesting and unique. And I think it's more that it's now a new thing. It's a new tool in a theatre maker's toolkit. Whether you were to make a show that was entirely in VR, or whether it's just a tool that you can use to make live performance, I think it's an extra string to the bow rather than something that's in competition. I'd be interested to know more about the sort of the animation side of things, and how those, how that world might collide with this.
We've got sort of 6 minutes until the end, but has anyone got a question for Ellie, or for Toby, or for Jenny? And if not, Jenny, I'm going to see what you think now, having heard.
Thank you for coming to me, because I found that absolutely fascinating. I think they're really, and I've been scribbling away like crazy here. I think some of the things I heard are really exciting. I think that Ellie talking about the sort of intimacy aspect of the experience is fascinating, because one of the things that we're doing at the moment, and is another sort of arm of our forward-looking, what's the future like, is about intimacy direction, intimacy coordination. Since the Me Too movement, there's been a trend towards having intimacy directors and intimacy coordinators. And in fact, Ita O'Brien, who is an absolute, you know, one of the leaders in the industry, who did I May Destroy You, was an intimacy director on that, is an alumni of Bristol Vic Theatre School, there was. And she has been in school and working with students. And I think it's really interesting that that interplay between that strand of training around intimacy and how you can navigate, you know, there used to be a time when it was everybody just, you know, crack on, and it could all be quite awkward. And now people being, treating intimate moments in the same way that you might treat a fight. So in the way that you treat a fight, you're not really fighting. You know, it's like, can I put my hand there? Can I punch you there? Can I do? It's actually the same with intimacy, and just being really clear and really upfront and really open, and really caring, and keeping actors so that they feel comfortable and they feel that they're not being pushed beyond where they want to go, and, you know, or finding different ways of doing things, rather than it just being a sort of like awkward scramble. And it's just really interesting that actually this is that surprised me, that students can be more physically robust with each other, physically closer, because they've had some training in, you know, not assuming I can put my arms all over you any longer, like it's the 1970s. So I found that very interesting. I think that also another area, and it'd be great, Ellie and Toby, to talk with you in more detail about, and with the actors, about specifically what they found. I think also, I thought that the point that Toby was making about the accessibility, about an audience, because actually, of course, what you can have an audience do, you know, we film our work a lot. We have, over lockdown, been curating that, and you know, just filming it and putting it out so that people can watch it over the internet. Is there a way that we could film it and people could watch it, you know, in VR? So rather than using motion capture, rather than using avatars, you actually use the live, you know, you have a live performance, and you have a 365 camera. Is it 365, 360? I can't do my angles. Camera that would capture that, and then people could actually, you know, rather than going to the cinema to watch it, they could sit in the middle of the stage and in effect watch the action around them. So there could be an immersive performance where you've got, if you like, live capture to then, so it's the audience end of it that is VR. And I think that the other thing that I took away from it, the last thing, or you know, well, there's loads of things, but the other sort of like another key thing to think about was the creation of those environments, because we talked about could the set, if you like, be loaded into the virtual reality space. And one of the things that we always do is, working with our designers, we create a model box. So, and it's a wonderful experience, because you create these scale model boxes of the stage, of the set design, and they're absolutely perfectly you know, they're perfectly to scale, and there's an immaculate detail on them. And there's always a moment when I'm sort of like halfway through a take of the play, or we're about to start, you know, the dress rehearsal. You've got the model box here, and it's like, oh, it's there, and oh, it's writ large there, and it isn't a wonderful thing. So could we use a model box? You know, can we capture that somehow, and then act within that? So those are things. And also, what's that relationship you were talking about, you know, facial capture, and Ellie, I think it was talking about, of course, you've only got your arms at the moment. So what is the sort of relationship between motion capture suits that people are on, and creating that, using that instead of just a sort of avatar? You know, what are the finessing, what's that next step, finessing around that? So I just think there's loads of ways that this can be taken forward in different strands that are absolutely fascinating. So, and I just thank you, Ellie and Toby, for all that amazing work on it. So those my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really, you know, I think it's a kind of a watch the space, really, isn't it? And I should probably, you queued me up nicely actually to say that, you know, in the autumn we, with our partners Bristol and Bath Creative R&D, myself and our psychology colleagues from the university, we'll be kind of looking to sort of, I think, have a sort of wider workshop with the theatre making community in Bristol, which, you know, I think a lot of these experiences that you've referenced, Toby and Ellie, and also what you're starting to put forward there, Jenny, I think we will start to look at these things and hopefully have a few practical examples, you know, people in suits and so on, performing certain scenes, and maybe starting to think about, you know, the model box ideas. And Anna's asked, well, I can see this, Anna, I know you just sent me as a direct message, but I'm going to have to read it out, which is, oh yes, so this is exciting because everything that we talked about today will be kind of put into a paper that will go forward to the CHI conference, hopefully for presentation, which is a human computer interaction conference that happens every year. And so all of this stuff will be distilled into an academic article, you know, to sort of share with the wider community, and that's you know, going to be really good to see, I think, where, you know, how that also kind of goes forward in terms of influencing others to do similar. I think we probably have to wrap up. Becca, should we wrap up? I feel like we should, because it's just gone 5 o'clock.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
And yeah, I mean, I look forward to hopefully do some more work on this, Toby and Ellie, because you've already done a lot, and also I think I'd also probably like to maybe try out being an actor in one of your sessions, and I think that might be something I could learn from. So thank you so much, and hope the last few days of your efforts at the school go well. And yeah, thank you very much for speaking with us today, and thank you everyone for joining us on the call, and thank you, Jenny, as well.
Thank you so much. It's been really interesting to be part of this, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Thank you.